Have you tried everything to beat negative thinking patterns in your head, but the victory seems to be short-lived for you? Today, I'll explain why we cannot win over negative thinking patterns running inside our heads using conventional methods like trying to ignore the thoughts or reframe the thoughts or even meditate them away. The harsh truth about negative thinking patterns is that, which we probably have been fighting for years, is that we did not create them. So how can we reframe something that we did not create? And I'll break down the origin of negative thinking, where it actually is generated from, self-generated from, for you to understand better the idea of we do not create negative thinking patterns originally. And this video will explain the biggest misconception about negative thinking and why reframing, using mental discipline, or trying to overpower and get rid of negative thinking patterns is not going to work. I'll give you a free resource that helps you to become more aware of your own negative thinking patterns that you have been using. Our thinking patterns are quite specific to us, and by understanding them, breaking them down, questioning them, reassessing them, and finding evidence from the real life about what we're actually using, our brain becomes more specific in resolving those negative thinking patterns by itself. So let's start with this biggest misconception about the origin of the negative thinking patterns. Many people believe that they create the thought loops in their heads, and somehow they are to blame for what is happening in their heads. This isn't true, but because of this belief, we often focus on the negative thoughts, try to catch them, meditate them away, or reframe them. But honestly, that's a waste of time. And it also makes us focus on something that we do not want or do not desire. As a result, that thing persists. And especially with thoughts, they persist all the time. So why we try to reframe or change or get rid of, stop our thinking, is because we are unaware of the origin of negative thinking. Negative thinking is a natural, self-generated stress response. I want to emphasize self-generated. It's like a byproduct or symptoms of stress. Stress is a biological reaction in our head, but biology is connected to the head because the brain sends all the signals throughout the body. So the byproduct of stress in the head is negative thinking. Negative thinking is a coping mechanism for survival, and it's perfectly okay as a short-term stress response. Now, persistent and excessive negative thinking is byproduct of chronic stress. And this is what I often encounter with my clients. For those who don't know me, I'm a trained hypnotherapist, advanced conversational hypnosis trainer, and a coach. And I help my clients essentially to de-escalate internal chronic stress response so they can deal with life and work situations with more calmness, creativity, and ease. So in the sessions, when it comes to, for example, negative thinking patterns, we do not focus on resolving those symptoms. We dive deeper into the source of stress that is generated negative thinking as a byproduct or its symptom. So I'm going to show a small presentation where I outline the 10 main negative thinking patterns, examples of the thought process, and how to countermeasure those specific negative thinking pattern types. Now, if you've been dealing with chronic stress for years and you just can't get rid of the negative thoughts without addressing the deeper issue. That's why we're approaching this presentation with a bit of caveat. If your stress has been persistent over years, a lot of my clients studied stress reaction early in life by surviving toxic environment or a very reactive parent. So the stress has been chronic, sometimes since childhood or sometimes through a situation they encountered in youth, which created overwhelming stress responses. So as a result, their bodies, their brain are in high stress alert, and this creates persistent negative thinking loop. So in this case, when the stress is chronic, the negative thinking patterns are also chronic, and we cannot really get rid of them without addressing the deeper issue causing us to actually stay in that high stress alertness. Negative thinking patterns are usually survival mechanism, which I said, and they do kick in when we are very stressed. The more stressed we are, the more extreme our thinking can become. Negative thinking patterns can help us short term, but they become harmful over time, and they lead to serious mental and physical issues like depression, anxiety, feelings of helplessness, creating physical issues in our bodies as well. Say if you're growing career or you just step into a role, or I've recently worked with an artist who wanted to manifest success, and he felt blocked from success. He wanted to express his creativity authentically, but was ridden with these persistent negative thinking patterns, which really held them back. These patterns need to be addressed at a deeper level for us to achieve long-term success and mental well-being. So it's normal to have occasional cognitive distortions. These negative thinking patterns are called cognitive distortions in psychology, and there's been identified 10 of them. So short-term, they're fine. When you identify a specific stressor, remove the stressor, usually negative thinking subsides. But if these patterns become your default way of thinking, they can produce a whole lot of stress and really hinder your success in career and relationships. In this presentation, I'll show you 10 main cognitive distortions, and I will also give you a free resource, which is called Your Cognitive Distortions. It will help you to identify your main negative thinking patterns and that you've been using. The resource includes examples of negative thinking patterns and self-questioning checklist, as well as countermeasures. As Lao Tzu said about self-awareness, knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom. So now, what would you want to know about your specific thinking pattern? Why is it so important to have that level of self-awareness about yourself? You want to achieve clear thinking, you want to focus on work tasks or home tasks, be present at home with your people. Imagine going into a meeting with bosses, feeling confident and free of that nagging self-doubt, that negative thinking habit, knowing that you are capable, just as capable as anyone else. So that kind of focus allows you to create and create problems creatively and effectively. Or at home, our deeper negative thinking patterns influence how we communicate and how we look after our family, right? Okay, so when we recognize and address these negative patterns, we can improve focus, have clear thinking, have that mental space to deal with life situations and work situations with ease, creativity, and power. So you really want to achieve that clear thinking, think positively in situation instead of defaulting into negative thinking. What I often see in clients when they come to me, they have tried working on negative patterns by using common method. They reframe thoughts and try to control them. While it's a great technique, it requires a lot of mental discipline and willpower. And when you're already running a chronic stress response, it takes away from the energy that you need. And reframed thoughts oftentimes feel unnatural and insincere. So if you've tried that, tried controlling your thoughts, um, tried reframing them, positive affirmations and meditation, and you didn't find relief, my solution is stop relying on willpower and mental discipline to manage your thoughts. Have you heard of monkey brain? Trying to control your thoughts with more thoughts is like engaging in a monkey business and focusing on things that we don't like and we don't want, which make those already powerful negative thought patterns more persistent. Instead, we want to understand the nature of negative thinking patterns, which you already do because they're, as I told you today, it's a natural stress response and a byproduct of stress. It acts as a natural coping mechanism, essentially, and it's okay short term, becomes damaging over long term. So once you recognize the negative patterns that you've been using and where they come from, second, you will identify specific negative thinking that you use and question them, question those patterns. This brings the self-awareness and helps you to break the cycle. Why is it unnecessary to reframe thoughts? Because reframing thoughts requires a lot of work, a lot of energy, including mental energy, with very little payoff. It demands willpower, strict mental discipline, energy, and time. And when it doesn't work, it leaves us feeling disempowered, undermines our confidence, and put more negative thoughts in our head. We end up falling into even deeper negative thinking patterns. We question our abilities and values as human beings. So now let's go through the examples, and at the end of the video, I'll give you a free resource that has all negative thinking pattern outlined, very simple, with relative examples and a 3-step framework for clarity and focus, how you can counter your specific thinking patterns without needing to use any strategy for reframe. I'm going to bring up this slide. Okay, so let's look at 10 common negative thinking patterns with examples and countering strategy. I won't have time to go through all 10 of them. I'll give you the full list and I will create a next video outlining the next 7 examples. Today, I'll go through the 3 main ones that I will encounter with my clients. So here they are at a glance, 10 common negative thinking patterns. In psychology, they are called cognitive distortions. So 1, jumping to conclusions, which includes mind reading, fortune telling, catastrophizing, black and white thinking, negative filtering and discounting the positives, overgeneralizing, should thinking, labeling, magnification, emotional reasoning, personalization, and blame. Let's go through 3 of them with examples and countermeasures. So let's start with the jump into conclusions. Presents itself in 2 main manifestations as mind reading and fortune telling. Mind reading is when you know what someone thinks, or you know what how they're going to react. For example, I know what they're thinking, I know how they're going to react. Fortune telling includes knowing what is going to happen, and it's usually a negative outcome. The reason for this type of thinking is that when we're trying to avoid something difficult and stressful, can you see it's a coping strategy? You feel helpless about changing things. The sense of helplessness is often present with people who have been under chronic stress, often through from their childhood. They tend to predict negative future So they stop trying and squish their motivation. So how we counter this negative thinking pattern? We reassess and find evidence to support the truthfulness or untruthfulness of this negative pattern. Then you ask questions. I have 5 questions that you can ask yourself. I'll include them here under the video. And finally, we'll start looking for alternative using so-called observer effect when we look at our situation as a third person. This is very briefly. So this is really an outline for you to see and find what is your specific or favorite negative thinking pattern that you use. The second one is catastrophizing, a very common one. That used to be my favorite one. A default thinking pattern when we predict the worst possible outcome. Let's look at the examples. My career will be over after the performance review. My daughter will never find a decent job. I will be alone forever if this date doesn't work out. My kids are horribly lazy. My partner never listens. I'm a horrible father. Notice how you start using those catastrophizing words. Always, forever, never, too much. In CBT, it's called awfulizing, using what's like terrible. So one way to counter this negative thinking pattern is by starting to change the words and using softer ones. Instead of terrible, you use unpleasant. Instead of forever, always, never, you use sometimes, occasionally, at this time. You can use softening words, rather, or a bit. And the last one for today's presentation is black and white thinking. Here's an example. After this performance, I'll either be fired or glorified by my boss. Can you see how these are two polarizing thoughts, black or white, and there is no gray shade in between? So another example, if I don't pass this exam, I'll fail in the subject. Extreme thinking, either everything good or either everything bad. These thoughts are quite polarized. Either failure, extreme failure, or extreme success, which is really kind of not a real world situation. We do not go every day experiencing those high highs or low lows. So this kind of thinking causes you to dwell on mistakes to the point that you are unable to move past them. Yeah, you kind of pick every mistake, analyze it, and create a complete sense of failure. Now, start understanding to counter this specific type of negative thinking. Start understanding or reminding yourself that progress, success, and failure, not all or nothing concepts. It's not all black and white. Recognize your strengths. Try to value your effort, even if it comes unnaturally to you at the beginning. Even if you are used to using that harsh, self-critical voice, demanding to be better, faster than everybody else, and acknowledge progress. It's useful to redefine what actually is failure and what is success. Here are some examples that you can use my examples. If you don't have examples of your own, this is an example of redefining failure and success. I'm growing and evolving every day. Failure is feedback. The more I fail, the more I learn. This one is my favorite, which I use all the time for myself. Everyone sucks at the beginning. And my other favorite is today I am where I wanted to be yesterday. I used to be very harsh on myself because I suffered from over responsibility and taking taking responsibility for everything and everyone. And I was expecting a lot of myself. So it helped me to really look back at how far I've come, look at some of the things that I have achieved. Okay, I'll stop sharing now. My solution works in 3 simple steps. You identify your thinking pattern. Most people are unaware of their thinking patterns. They just know it's all bad, right? They don't like what's happening inside their head, and they blame themselves for what is happening inside their heads. There are 10 cognitive distortions, and in my practice, I encounter the 3 ones that I've just outlined, the most common ones. Number 1, you bring in some self-awareness into what's happening inside your head. Use psychology. Number 2, understand and notice this thinking pattern. We do not need any exercises on reframe for now. We can actually change at a deeper level just by noticing. As I said, thinking strategy or thinking habit is self-generated. It can be self-dissolved as well. Simply recognize the pattern gives us power and confidence to make tangible and concrete changes in the long run. The 3rd step is you audit your thinking. My free resource has a 7-day tracker where you tick a pattern that you identified every time it occurs, and you score yourself from 0 to 10 on how severe the thought was. So what can happen to some people just by doing this simple exercise, by doing the thought audit and noticing the negative thinking pattern, is that they stimulate their brain power enough for the brain to start dissolving the patterns. And it's a positive outcome. The brain excels at working on concrete tasks and solving specific problems. And when we start focusing on something that we want, not on something that we don't want, the brain has a natural ability to come up with solutions. And it goes along with the brain making connections about usefulness, or damaging effects of these patterns. So my message today is really give yourself time to bring in some self-awareness into what's happening inside your head. Stop blaming yourself for what's happening. Realize that negative thinking patterns have very specific origin as a stress response. Give yourself time to learn a little bit about yourself, bringing that inside. And if you take one thing away from this video, is that negative thinking is byproduct of stress, being a natural stress response, like our muscles tensing and our heartbeat changing in a stressful situation. And negative thinking become problematic when they persist and they intensify over years if the deeper stress response is not addressed, because they create the more intense stress loop between the brain and the body, causing further havoc in your system. So remember that I offer a free resource, Cognitive Distortions, help you identify your main thinking habits. The resource includes examples of all 10 negative thinking habit patterns, self-questioning checklist, and a 7-day tracker to do your own thinking audit. So want to dismantle your negative thinking patterns? DM me word clear thinking, drop a line below with the word clear thinking to get your free copy of Cognitive Distortions. And if you enjoy content like this, please consider subscribing or hitting the like button. Thank you. Bye.